Okay, so now we're going to go over actually doing the smooth skinning. So what we want to do is we want to grab all of our bind joints. There's a few joints that we don't need to use in our bind, so we're going to exclude those. So I'm going to rename any of these tip joints. I'm going to get rid of this underscore bind. Okay. Because we don't want these to be, these aren't going to be controlling any skinning information. Okay, so now I've got everything renamed, and because I'm using a good naming convention, I can just type in the mail command line, select space, and then I can do a star. It's been a while since I've done this, so we'll see if it works. Star bind, semicolon, press enter. I lied. So I think we may need quotes. Okay, so when I put that in the star bind and quotes, then it's going to select anything in my entire scene that has the word bind in it at the end of it, I should say, at the end of its name. Okay, so I've got all my bind joints selected, and if I had a character which was one solid mesh, then I could go through and select. I would select all the joints, then I would select the geometry, and to do the actual bind. So let's say this was the entire character, and I needed all the joints to affect the sweater. This is fictitious. Then I go to Skin, Smooth Bind, Option Box, and I'm going to explain these options real quick. We're going to bind to, you could choose joint hierarchy, but we're control freaks, so we're going to change this to selected joints, because we want to make sure we only use the selected joints. Our bind method is closest in distance. Our skinning method is, we'll just leave that at classic linear. Dual quaternion does create a better skinning, a better deformation, but it is a lot more taxing on the computer's resources, hardware resources, I should say. The normalizing weights, we'll leave that at interactive. Weight distribution, we're going to do that by, so if it has to choose between, I'm having trouble way of explaining this. I'll come back to it. We're going to leave that at distance for now. Anyway, we're going to allow multiple bind poses. Sure, but I've never needed them. We're going to set the max influences to 1. This is my method. I think you'll enjoy it if you try it. Maintain max influences. We're going to turn that off. And then we're going to remove unused influences. Nope. And then we're going to colorize the skeleton. I don't like it, but you can leave that on if you want to. It's just going to color the joints for you. Include hidden selections on creation. Sure or not, I don't know, it doesn't matter. I guess if you had a mesh that was hidden, that seems like a new option. If you had meshes that were hidden, then I guess if you had this checked, then it would go ahead and bind those as well, if they were selected. Okay, and then our drop-off rate, I'm going to go ahead and change this to 1. The drop-off rate is a measure of distance in Maya units. So each grid section is 1 centimeter. So this drop-off rate is 1 centimeter, and meaning that it's a blending of how far the vertices can share weighting information. Now, this isn't really going to matter too much because our max influences is set to 1, which means that every vertice can only be controlled by a single joint. Okay, and obviously it's not going to stay that way, but it's helpful to start it out that way. So I'm going to click Apply, and now these joints are going to be controlling that mesh. Not very well, but they're going to be controlling it. Okay, so that was just the sweater. So there's probably a better way to do this. And so if I select this sweater, I right click on it and go to Paint, Skin Cluster, then I have Skin Cluster 1, 2, and 3. So those are going to be the sweater, the backpack, and the tassel on the backpack. Okay. So I'm going to go back to that, and I'm going to go to the Skin Cluster 1. I'm going to open up my toolbox, and you can see a listing of all the joints that are possible influences objects on this mesh. Now, this is just the sweater, and there's things like the knee, the ankle, and the ball joint. Those don't even make any sense to be controlling the sweater. Okay, so we can be more selective about this since our mesh, our character, is not just a single mesh. So I'm going to undo. Okay. And here's my selection. I'm going to select only the joints that should be controlling the sweater. So I'm going to deselect the ball, ankle, and knee from both sides. And I know that the rest are probably going to need to control the sweater. Then I'll click Apply. Okay. Now if I press up in the command line and then press enter, it'll reselect all those bind joints. And this time I'm going to bind the skirt. But I'm going to deselect all the joints that have nothing to do with the skirt. So the wrist, clap of the arms, the head, neck, and shoulders, the first couple spine joints have nothing to do with the skirt. Then the balls and knees. So there we go. So I'm left with the hips bind, the hip left and right bind, the spine base bind, and the root bind. Okay, then I'll click Apply. Okay, now I'm going to do the hand. And this is the left hand. So I'm going to grab the left hand joints that are appropriate. So the wrist and the elbow. Click Apply. Grab the right hand, do the same thing with the right hand joints. Apply. Okay. The head for now, we'll go ahead and, I'm not going to bind the head because it's not finished, but you could if you wanted to. Now I'm going to grab the leg left leg, and this only needs to be controlled by the hip left and the knee left bind joints. Click apply, and then the shoes on the left side are going to be controlled by the knee, ankle, and ball joints. Apply, knee, ankle, and ball. For the right side shoe, apply. Okay. Now everything should be bound, and the quick way to check this is everything except for the face is bound anyway. If I grab that root joint and move it, everything should move with the skeleton now if it's bound. Okay. With the exception of the head, which maybe I'll go ahead and skin just because. So I'll grab the head base, and I'll grab the appropriate geometry, skin, smooth bind. I don't have to do the option box again because it saved my options from last time. Click bind. You can tell how heavy that was on it. It took it a lot longer to do. Now if I grab the root bind joint, everything's going to move. And it's a lot more sluggish because that face has got a tremendous amount of geometry in it currently. Okay. Now, this root bind joint, if I select it, it's going to have a list of skin clusters, and those are the clusters that are controlling those are the clusters that are being given information by this root bind joint. So these names are not very meaningful to me. So what I need to do is I need to go through each piece of geometry, and I need to rename these. So skin cluster, this one is the sweater underscore skin cluster. Okay. This one is going to be the hand left skin cluster. And so on and so forth. So we'll do the backpack. And you'll see why this is important in just a second. So this is backpack. I can't remember backpack's one word or two, but backpack underscore skin cluster. This is tassel. This is head. Leg underscore L underscore. Leg underscore R underscore. And we just got two things left. So let's boot underscore skin cluster. And I forgot to add the side on that one, so I'll have to go back. Boot underscore R underscore. Underscore L. Okay. Now, the reason this is important is if, we can right click on a mesh and go to paint, skin cluster, and now I know which one I'm editing because they're named appropriately. Okay. So I'm going to start out This is actually going to be quite a bit easier to paint weights on. I will go ahead and point out a couple things that always get students and cause them grief. The first thing that happens is you forget to uncheck that maintain max influences. So you don't have to undo it. You can just change it. So if you select the offending geometry and go to your attribute editor, and you want to go to that skin cluster, sweater skin cluster, and this maintain max influences. If this is left on, it's going to be a pain. Okay, you're not going to be able to blend your weights if this is left on, because your max influences is set to 1. Now, if you're working in video games, this is important to note. A lot of times in video games, each vertice can only be controlled by a certain maximum number of influences, or in this case, joints. If that is the case, you need to find out what that is, and it's usually platform specific. So like a lot of your mobile devices can only have 2 influences per vertice. Console games, I believe it's 5. It's probably higher than that. That's pretty old information. And then on computers, I don't know, who knows? On feature film, are we concerned about this? No. So just turn it off. Okay. So that's actually the biggest gotcha right there. That will drive you nuts. The other thing that will get you is the normalized weights. You want that set to interactive. That means that is when you edit weights, every time you edit them, Maya is going to go ahead and update all the surrounding influence objects so that each vertice has 100% control. So if you take away some influence for an influence object, then that influence has to be redistributed to other influence objects so that it can maintain 100%. If a mesh component or a vertice doesn't have 100% influence or more than 100% influence, then you'll get what's called if it has more than that, then you'll get a weird deformation. And let me just show you that. So if I grab the sweater and I turn this normalized weights to none, I'm going to grab a vertice right here in the center in the front. I go to Window, General Editors, Component Editor. Go to SmoothSkins. And right now it's controlled 100% or 1 by the spine base. But if I tell that to be controlled by 1.105% by that base controller, and you can see that it moves, or that spine base joint anyway, and you'll see that jumps out of the way. That's not predictable behavior. And if I move that root joint, it's even less predictable than what you may have initially thought, as it moves more than the joint that it belongs to. Okay, so that's bad. So that gets students a lot. Now, the other thing that may happen if you don't have normalized weights on is you may end up with less than 100% influence. And so let me just do this. Let me grab a smattering of joints real quick, and this is what it's going to look like when that happens. Okay, so if I select all of those and I set their totals to 0.5, well, let me change it there. I was hoping. Let me just do this. 0.5. Set those to 0. See how they're all starting to collect at the origin of the scene? That's what's going to happen. So if I turn these all to 0, they actually just go to the origin of the scene. It just means that there's a skin cluster, and the skin cluster has no information about how to tell them and where they should be. Okay, so you'll see this a lot. It's fairly common. Let me undo. Put things back. Okay. So those are some gotchas you need to look out for.